Welcome back to another episode of 20 Minutes of Winning. Here we are with Larry Thornton, live and in
Yeah,
color from Birmingham, Alabama. How are you today, sir?
I am doing great. Always look forward to these, not just to spend time with you, but I just have to believe that our listeners will get something out of these that can get them to the next level. That's what this is really all about.
I hope so. I hope so. So today we're going to talk a little bit about chapter 10, which is titled Know Who You Are.
Huh.
When I read chapter 10, to me, it seems to center on leadership and being a leader and winning through leading. And there's a couple of stories in there, one where you're the leader and one where somebody above you takes a leadership role to facilitate some things getting done by you. So I want to talk about those. The first
Sure.
is this anecdote involving a guy you've called John. I assume that's not his
Yep.
real name. Who has been fairly obnoxious to you in the workplace, and you find out that his wife has purchased a new Cadillac, and you
Yep.
decide to do something to recognize that. Could you talk about what went on there and how that changed John's whole approach to dealing with you as a coworker?
Yeah, what an interesting episode in the book. Now we have to go back to 1979, and I am the advertising manager, recently promoted, with 7 or 8 employees, an all-white report. And there's another chapter in the book that we're going to get to with one of the 20 minutes of winning. But know who you are and knowing your worth is probably one of the most missed opportunities. When you talk about leadership, people tend to conjure up this great lessons of 7 habits of Covey, and you've learned all of these. But great leadership is not about much more than simply caring. Do you care? Do you care? It's very important. As a matter of fact, I just said this at one of our manager meetings yesterday. Our director of operations, I said these words, Tracy, and he's great. He's been with me for 25 years. I said, Tracy, we have 235 to 40 employees. If any one of those employees even thinks that you don't want him or her to be successful, that's not their problem. That's your problem. And you should go out of your way. It would disturb me greatly if any employee ever thought that I didn't want him or her to be successful. And if they think that, I'd say you have a misunderstanding of me and who I am, and it's worth it to me to calibrate that so that you do have that. So when you know who you are, you make certain moves and gestures. And if you want a better community and to improve the lives of other people as much as your own, that in and of itself becomes leadership. It's not something that is branded. It's just doing the right thing and caring. So yeah, John had gotten a car. Now, to give you a little context, I would have to walk through the service department to get to my department at Coca-Cola. And whenever John saw me coming, he would turn his back
Mm.
so as to not even have to give me the disrespect of not speaking. It's like, not only am I not going to speak to you, I don't even see you. And that went on and on and on and on. And it was just routine. But this particular morning, John was stopping everybody he could, telling him about this beautiful Cadillac. It was metallic green with white top and white wall tires. And he was excited. And I saw that he's telling everybody, of course, except me. So one of my employees, who was just so good about smoothing out some of the racial divide, I can't tell you how grateful I was for Tim. So Tim was telling me about the car and the Cadillac, and he said, "But you know what he said about you, Larry, a couple of months ago? What he asked me, he says, how does that And so Tim's response was, well, first of all, so he says, first of all, he's not a fine boss. I said, come on, Tim, tell me what did you really say? You know, you can level with me. He says, no, man, I hate that kind of stuff. And I said, well, let's do this. I want you to find out John's wife's name and get the spelling right, kind of inconspicuously. And he did. And at that time, I would do a lot of hand lettered tags on the front of vehicles. And we found the perfect metallic match. And I lettered it in white with a black shadow. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. So when it was ready to go, I walked over to the service department and I walked up to, he turned his back just like he typically do. And I said, hey, John, how are you? He doesn't know what I'm doing. He grumbled something. I said, listen, man, I've been hearing about that beautiful caddy you got for your wife. I thought that she would like this nameplate on the front of it. He turned around with such amazement and gratitude and appreciation. It was like two completely different people. From that moment on, John not only would speak to me, he would walk over to my department to recount his wife's appreciation for the tag. Now, when you know who you are, first of all, I will say that there's a greater call. It is incumbent upon those of us who know who we are because, Dave, believe it or not, people live and die and never, ever get to know who they are, their purpose, their call. But when you are so fortunate to know that, then you make moves that typically other people wouldn't make. I really wanted to help him celebrate his wife's car. And John was not as much of a racist, in my opinion, as that episode appeared to be. You know what John was? John was ignorant. And, you know, I divide ignorance into at least two categories. There is willful ignorance, and then there is innocent ignorance. You have just bought into the social construct messaging. You don't know me, but once you get to know me and that I would do a gesture like this, you know, Dave, I live for that. Building a better community. And John was a motivation for me to believe that, you know, it's not, are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a motivation to me that so many people are just innocent. I don't know any better. And I think that I can do different. And I just so want to contribute to that whole process.
The thought that comes to mind for me is once he gets to know you a little bit, you're no longer a category, you're a person.
You know, kind of difficult to dislike someone you've gotten to know.
Right, right. It's easy to dislike a category, but when you know a person and there's no basis for disliking them, it's really hard to force yourself to do it.
All right. Things that are strange and foreign to us. That's what we believe, you know. If more people understood what spiders do to make our lives livable, I mean, we would be overrun with insects were it not for spiders. You know, we could have a different appreciation, level of appreciation for spiders rather than ooh, and just smashing it every time you see it.
I've had an interesting experience this semester. I've actually got two students in my doctoral seminar who are from Iran. I don't know if you've spent any time with anybody from Iran. This is a first for me. And of course, historically, the United States and Iran have not had good relationships. And so it's fairly unusual to talk to somebody from Iran. Yeah. But I mean, well, let's see. I was 12 when the hostages were taken in 1979. And I mean, I always grew up thinking, you know, Iran's a hostile country towards Americans. You see these scenes on TV, death to America. America is the great Satan. But, you know, these two individuals, one male, one female, they couldn't be nicer. Very unassuming. They don't hate America. They're excited to be here. They love their home country, but you know, they don't view us as the great Satan. And you know, one of them said to me, governments are governments and people are people. You know, governments fight with each other, but people, when they get the chance to know each other, you know, we have, and you've said this repeatedly, we have a lot more in common than we have differences.
different. Let me tell you this. You know, you and I talked about it. I recently returned from Egypt,
Right.
McDonald's meeting we had in Egypt. And ironically, it was just 5, 6 days before the Hamas Israel debacle.
Mm,
So we were pretty close to it. So I got back. But in the Cairo airport, Dave, I had one of the most genuine, one of the most humble, one of the most sincere conversations that I've had in a long time. And we never exchanged a single word. It kind of reminds you of that quote from St. Francis of Assisi. Go forth and preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. That's powerful. This gentleman, I don't know of what ethnicity or nationality, but he noticed me from the luggage rack, and he just does a thumbs up like that. And then he comes over to me and he fist bumps me and he sits right next to me. He snaps me on the knee and I popped him on his knee and we fist bumped again. And then when his buddy, he got his buddy's attention, he beckoned him over and he started pointing at me. And his buddy comes over and I fist bumped him and we just kind of just looking at each other and just this great conversation without words. Then he gives his cell phone to his wife, I'm assuming his wife, and he leans into me to take a photograph, a selfie with the two of us. So I give her my cell phone and I have that photo, and she takes another one of the two of us. Not a single word. And when I explained that situation, I said, I wonder what the attraction was. And as it turns out, I was wearing a black cap and he was wearing a black cap. So it's amazing what can connect people, but such a genuine conversation, sincere, and no words were ever spoken. We don't do enough of that.
mm-hmm. The other story in chapter 10 that stands out is when the president of Coca-Cola United called a store manager had treated you rudely and basically sent you away. And the president of Coca-Cola United called that store manager and said, hey, Larry Thornton's our advertising manager. I'm sending him back and you're going to treat him with respect and work with him. And the guy did. What did that mean to you as an employee that somebody would take that sort of leadership role and basically put the hammer down on a bad behavior situation?
Sure. It was absolutely awesome, but I would think that some of our younger listeners would not be able to fully appreciate the day. I mean, we're talking in the late 70s when that occurred. And here again, social construct messaging was of a certain caliber. So I'm recently promoted to advertising manager. I go out to this major customer, a grocer. We sell a lot of product through there. So you want to be sensitive how you do that. So I go out and I'm talking to the store manager about what we can and can't do in the way of signage, Coca-Cola signage for that business. And about a minute or two into my missive, he just stopped me cold and he said, you don't tell me, boy, what I can and can't have. You just go back and tell your boss man what I want. So I'm saying, this is going to be interesting. Wow. And when things like that happen, it just kind of takes me aback more than anything, rather than get angry. And I was just like, really? Are you really that narrow-minded? Kind of thing. So I go back and I'm sharing with the president this episode because I knew he knew personally that situation at that particular store. Right in my hearing, he picks up the phone, called the manager of that particular grocery store, and they exchange a few niceries, phone pleasantries. And then he said, I understand Larry Thornton has been out to see you about Coca-Cola signage. Larry is our advertising manager, and I'm going to ask him to come back out to see you to let you know what we can do for your business in the way of signs. So I felt validated. Had he said, well, Larry, we're just going to send somebody else out there, that this guy can deal with, because you got to protect the business. But that meant a lot to me that he asked me to go back out. And I recall going back out because I wanted to keep the time that I went as close to the conversation to the president as I could. So I go right back out. And as I can recall, I delivered on my assignment, and nothing happened, or nothing that I was ever made aware of. But that's the kind of validation to be with a brand like a Coca-Cola that could stand for putting to rest some of these old construct messaging. And I couldn't have been more grateful for that.
And for young people who may not realize it, to be called boy was pretty darn insulting. I mean, that's a serious insult.
A grown man.
Right.
Wow.
And yeah, like you said, it would have been real easy for the president to send somebody else, because he doesn't want to risk the store manager preferring Pepsi in the future. Are we allowed to mention Pepsi?
Only once.
The blue and red guys.
the blue and red guys. Absolutely. I think, though, it's interesting. Now, if I make the move, let me tell you what I did. It kind of sounds counterintuitive. So we were after this particular location that was just like perfect. I could see it from the interstate, Coke and Pepsi. It was called Party City. And I wanted that location. So I go out to meet this particular store owner, and I go in, and he's just belligerent. He does, here again, late 70s. So he said, well, I'll think about it, and I'll let you know, like that, So I called him a few days later to get his thoughts, Dave. I don't think I've ever told you this story. And here's what he said, because people can't necessarily know who they're talking to over the phone. So he said, well, I might do it if y'all don't send that back out here. And I said, well, sir, I think we can manage that. So the same gentleman that we're going to talk about with the news drawing, Mark, I says, Mark, go out and see Mr. whatever his name is. And he goes out, White, goes out, close the deal. And we've got keeping your eye on the prize, the biggest Coke. I mean, we got so many brownie points for landing that location. I don't even know that he sold Coca-Cola, but it was the location that we were after. And after it was all up and done, it was a beautiful job. Then I go back out with Mark, and I meet this guy, and I said, I just want to thank you for allowing Coca-Cola to brand this sign. Now, he could have just chosen to whitewash the whole thing out. That was a risk. But, so it's just, we just start to have fun with it.
I like these stories where you coldly twist the metaphorical knife at the end. It's always enjoyable. Yeah. It works. But you have to know who you are in order to do that, Right. Absolutely. Well, our 20 minutes have come and gone. I've enjoyed hearing about your, yes, sorry. It's tough being the timekeeper. We could do this for probably 40 minutes easily. Absolutely. But if we're going to stick with our title, we have to cut off at 20 minutes and
another 20 minutes. But we're going to do this again, right?
We are going to do it again. And I wanted to talk about your friend Hoyt and your employee, Miss Burtis, as part of a leadership discussion. So we'll have to leave that for another time as well.
Absolutely. Great.